So the city was all prepped. But what about its residents? Who were they voting for? We talked to a lot of people, women rallying for abortion rights, immigrants, Arab Americans and Indian Americans, all to gauge what the voter sentiment was like. Listen to what each one of them had to say. Abortion rights. They've always been a point of contention in US politics. But this year, they're at the forefront. This is the first US presidential election since the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. Women in America lost their national right to abortion. They lost the right over their own bodies.
My body, my choice!
And now they're out on the streets to fight for it. For millions of voters, reproductive rights could determine the next president of the United States. And they're making themselves seen and heard. This is Washington, D.C., the national capital and the center of all the political action. This is where hundreds of women have gathered for a march to rally for abortion rights. We are in the American capital where hundreds of feminists and reproductive rights activists have gathered just days before the election. This event is strategically timed along with the nationwide Get Out the Vote efforts. It's a powerful reminder of what's at stake in this election. To understand why abortion rights are such a pivotal issue today, we need to go back in history. In 1973, the US Supreme Court gave a landmark ruling in a case called Roe versus Wade. It granted American women the constitutional right to abortion. But nearly 50 years later, in 2022, the Supreme Court overturned that precedent. So abortion was no longer a national right in the US. The power to regulate women's choices was back in the hands of individual states. Now, each state can decide whether women can abort unwanted pregnancies, at what stage, and under what conditions. Basically, access to abortion now depends on where you are in America. For example, here in Washington, D.C., abortion is allowed in all stages of pregnancy. But in Texas, it is illegal unless you're dying. So far, 17 American states have outlawed abortion. Some have very narrow exceptions, like only in cases of rape, incest, or if a person's life is in danger. 8 other states allow limited access to the procedure. This is despite the fact that nearly 66% Americans support complete legal access to abortion.
Since 2016, we've been telling folks that this is the most consequential election of your lifetime, and each year it's been true, whether it's 2018, 2020, 2022, and more than ever in 2024, we are voting on freedom or fascism, and there's really no middle ground.
We got to stand up for democracy. We have to stand up for a woman's right to have control over her body, control over her life. Women's rights are human rights, and we were back in the hallways.
Which brings us to the presidential race. Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. Support for abortion rights will benefit the Democrats. Harris has been quite vocal about the issue. She has vowed to protect women's rights if elected. But she was part of the administration which was in power when Roe versus Wade was overturned. Her predecessor, Joe Biden himself, has not been as vocal about the issue because of his Catholic background. So critics question if Harris will be different. Meanwhile, Donald Trump appointed the 3 Supreme Court justices who played a crucial role in overturning Roe versus Wade. He also supports the idea of US states governing abortion. Although in the last few months, he seems to have softened his stance. He called himself the father of IVF, that's in vitro fertilization. He also said that he would not push for a national abortion ban as president. As activists prepare to march past the White House today, their message is clear. They're watching. They want action from the next administration, from those in power. In fact, this is more than just a march, they say. This is a demand for accountability and a call for the next government to prioritize reproductive rights. With the presidential race deadlocked, abortion rights could be the deciding factor in crucial swing states. These are the 7 states that will decide who becomes president. Many activists here fear another Trump presidency and support Kamala Harris. But this may not translate into as many votes as the Democrats had expected.
I'm terrified. I'm terrified as to what's going to happen to this country and women's rights. This is the most election in our country's history, and I think a lot of Americans don't realize that. What's at stake?
A lot has changed in the United States since 2020, but everything has changed for the women of America. Abortion rights have become one of the most polarizing issues of this election. For women under 30, it's even more important than inflation, they say. So this march, right before the US presidential election, is a reminder that the fight for these women is not just political, it's also personal. It's the final day of campaigning in Tacoma Park. The city council election is in full swing, and candidate Ambriose Agose is going old school. With pamphlets in hand, he is going door to door in the hope of winning over the last remaining undecided voters.
All type of community are supporting me: white, African, Black American, Indian, Spanish. Yes, I have all those communities supporting me.
Agose's campaign materials reflect his wide outreach. They are printed in several languages, including English, Spanish, and French, even Hindi. That's because he's not just seeking the votes of Americans, he's appealing to people from all parts of the world who live here, even illegally. This is Tacoma Park, a city in the US state of Maryland. This is on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. And Tacoma Park is unique because it allows non-US citizens to vote in local city-level elections. This is both legal US residents and illegal immigrants. They're all allowed to vote, and this is a right that was given to them way back in 1993. The idea was to involve all people in local decision-making and planning. Tacoma Park has been a sanctuary city for migrants since 1985. For decades, it has provided refuge to migrants of all kinds. Today, about 30% of the city's population is made up of migrants. Agose is aiming to win their support. He is running to represent Ward 6, where many migrants and non-citizens live. Agose says, even without citizenship, they must have a vote.
People who live here, they contribute building the city. So when it comes to the election, to give them chance also to express their voice.
A lot of Americans do not agree with this view, especially the Republicans and their leader Donald Trump. They believe, and perhaps rightly so, that allowing non-citizens to vote is a dangerous trend. Trump aims to abolish the idea of sanctuary cities altogether, and the Republican Party has been pushing for legislation to ensure this. Republicans like House Speaker Mike Johnson say that the non-citizen voting process is a clear and present danger. Why? Because they fear that this could ultimately change the makeup of the US Congress. Republicans have tried to bring in laws that restrict non-citizens from elections. Bills have been introduced in the US Congress that require proof of citizenship before you register to vote and restrict federal funding to cities like Tacoma Park. In fact, earlier this year, they also blocked a law that allowed non-citizens to vote in local elections in DC. Immigration was already a hot-button issue in this election. The idea of allowing non-citizens to vote has only intensified the debate. The concept itself is not new, though. Only a few cities allow non-citizens to vote, that too in just local elections. The turnout too remains extremely low, because illegal immigrants tend to not want to attract attention by turning up to vote. Yet, there have been cases of fraud. In Michigan, which is a battleground state, a Chinese student pretended to be a US citizen. He successfully cast a vote in the presidential election. Observers say such cases are rare. But in close polls where every vote counts, no side wants to take chances. Also, immigration has become a point of contention for American voters. 3 out of 5 Americans say it's a key issue. Some accuse illegal immigrants of taking away jobs. Others say immigrants use welfare services and unfairly take away American taxpayer money. There are also safety concerns. Migrants are accused of being criminals and of smuggling drugs into the country. Donald Trump has capitalized on this anti-immigrant sentiment. Trump says that November 5th will be Liberation Day if he is elected. He plans to crack down on illegal immigrants. He is pushing for mass deportations.
On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program of criminals in American history. It's going to be the largest deportation of criminals. We're going to get them out of here fast.
Trump wants to deport about 15 to 20 million illegal immigrants using a law from 1798 called the Alien Enemies Act. Reports show that 88% of all Republicans support this. They support mass deportations. Obviously, this has immigrants concerned.
A lot of us are scared because Trump says the first to be deported will be the Venezuelans. Understand?
Every 4 years it's terrifying. Of having the knowledge, of having to know where the ICE detention is. So if my husband gets taken, I know where to go, because it's terrifying having to tell my kids why we're voting a certain way, because those elections are so important of where their dad is, where their dad's status could end up.
The issue of immigration in America is too big for either party to ignore. Both Republicans and Democrats are promising to reduce the flow of illegal immigrants, but neither side has presented a concrete plan to fix the problem. Involving illegal immigrants in the democratic process and giving them the right to vote only complicates things further. It's crunch time for American voters. They're heading out to elect their next president. We can guess what's on their mind as they queue up. Maybe abortion or inflation or healthcare. But for some voters, it's a war being fought thousands of kilometers away. Israel's war on Gaza. Arabs and Jews are influential blocs in America. There are 3.7 million Arab Americans and 5.8 million Jewish Americans. In an election of close margins, their support is crucial. Yes, domestic issues matter to them, but so does the war in West Asia, especially to Arab Americans who feel that Joe Biden is enabling Israel. You may wonder, what can Biden do? Doesn't the responsibility lie with Israel? Well, on paper, yes, it does. But do remember, American presidents have a lot of leverage over Israel. In the past, they've brokered peace deals between Israel and the Arab world. It was right here in these White House lawns that in the 1990s, then President Bill Clinton hosted the leaders of Israel and Palestine. It was also here that Donald Trump brokered the Abraham Accords. So the voters have a legitimate question in their minds. If those presidents could do it, why not Joe Biden? Arab Americans have traditionally voted for Democrats, but maybe not this time. Polls say 42% of them back Donald Trump, only 41% back Kamala Harris. Here at the Islamic Center in Washington, that shift is clear. This is among the oldest mosques in the city. Opened way back in 1952 by then President Eisenhower. Amid Washington's Greco-Roman cityscape, this traditional Mamluk style stands out. Years ago, these worshippers would have voted for Democrats, but not anymore.
Americans have been in a gridlock for decades, and they keep thinking that the Democrats are going to save them. We were pushed to vote for Biden in 2020, and look what he did. He's the one perpetrating the genocide. So for the record, the Gazan genocide will go down in history as being under Democratic leadership and not Republican leadership.
I have found that President Trump has been slightly more effective in reaching Muslim and Arab leaders. He's been a little bit more doubtful about pursuing war and pursuing more violent, approaches to these kinds of problems.
It's not as much about liking Trump, it's more about punishing the Democrats. But Trump will take it. In some of the swing states, Arab vote could be crucial. Perhaps the difference between winning and losing, like Michigan, for instance. The state is home to more than 200,000 Arab Americans. Trump won it by 10,000 votes in 2016. He lost it by 150,000 votes in 2020. This time again, he senses an opportunity. Days before voting, Trump visited Dearborn in Michigan, often called the Arab capital of America, and his message there, that he will end the war.
We're going to bring peace. You're going to have peace in the Middle East, but not with the clowns that you have running the U.S. right now. You're going to have peace. You're going to have peace in the Middle East.
So Trump is making inroads among Arabs. What about Jews? They too have traditionally voted for Democrats. This is the Sixth and I Synagogue in Washington, D.C., among the oldest in the city. It was inaugurated way back in 1908. Then in the year 2005, the 43rd President of the US, George Bush, attended a special dinner here. A year before that, he had made minor inroads into the Jewish vote bank, which was until then considered impossible for a Republican candidate to do. Now, almost a decade later, Donald Trump is pulling out all the stops. He says that Kamala Harris is anti-Jew, even though she's married to one. He has met the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at his home in Florida. As president, he moved the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But despite all these efforts, he's not getting much success. Surveys say that 71%, more than 71% Jews in swing states say that they will vote Harris. Many people have speculated why this happens. Republicans support Israel to the hilt, yet Jews back Democrats. Some say it's because Jews feel closer to democratic liberal values. Others point to neo-Nazis in Trump's camp. Anti-Semitism has risen 360% since the Hamas attack last year. So American Jews are rightly worried. In 2020, they put Joe Biden over the line. They helped him win. In the key swing state of Pennsylvania, there are 300,000 Jews. Biden won the state by just 82,000 votes. In 2016, Trump won by just 44,000 votes. So both these communities matter. If you look at the top issues in this election, it's abortion or inflation or democracy. But these alone will not determine the outcome. A few thousand Arab or Jewish votes could put Kamala Harris or Donald Trump in the White House. The Arab voters want to punish the Democrats for supporting Israel, and the Jewish voters continue to support the Democrats despite Donald Trump's outreach. So in a lot of ways, Joe Biden's shadow looms large over this election, even though he's pulled out. His failures have alienated the Arab voters, and Kamala Harris may end up paying the price for it. Millions of Indians have made their way to America over the decades. They have made a name for themselves in the business and tech world. Indian Americans are often called the model minority. But this election season, they're also being seen through another lens. They are being seen as a crucial voting bloc, one with the power to influence the final outcome in the presidential race. We are in Fairfax County in the state of Virginia. This is part of the greater Washington area. It's America's national capital region. Now, Fairfax is one of the richest regions in the US, and it is home to a large number of Indian immigrants. Some 32,000 Indian Americans live in Fairfax. They make up almost 3% of the population. And in an election as close as this one, 3% can make all the difference. Indian immigrants have made an economic mark in Fairfax over the years. On average, they are better educated and wealthier than any other immigrant group. They're even doing better than US-born citizens. Indian immigrants have a higher rate of home ownership. and more incorporated businesses than any other demographic in Fairfax. So you can say that they've been a dominant economic force for a while. And that's the case across most of the US. But now, along with economic power, Indian immigrants also have political power. There are about 5.2 million Indian Americans. This includes both first-generation immigrants and their descendants. About 2.6 million Indian Americans are eligible to vote in this election, and both major parties are vying for their vote. Donald Trump recently put out this tweet on Diwali. Look at the points he's raising. Trump basically says that he's the best man for Hindus, and so Hindu Americans should vote for him. Not all Indian Americans are Hindus, of course, but they are in the majority. So this is a pitch for most of the Indian American vote. Kamala Harris tried to capitalize on Diwali as well, putting out this video to make one last appeal to Indian Americans. Over the course of this presidential campaign, the Democrats have tried their best to capture the Indian American vote. They've been canvassing for months, using slogans like Desis Decide or Desis Vote. The Democrats have been active in all the swing states in particular.
You can make the difference in this election. Please sign up with Indian American Impact. You can go to desipresident.com. Sign up right now to get engaged. Let's win this election.
The registration site is desipresident.com, a not-so-subtle highlighting of Kamala Harris's ethnicity. The Democrats have also roped in prominent Indian American celebrities, like former Top Chef host Padma Lakshmi, who campaigned door-to-door in Pennsylvania. It was an all-out blitz by the Democratic Party. But despite all this effort, they've been bleeding Indian American votes. A nationwide survey of Indian Americans was conducted recently in the weeks leading up to the election, and the results are disappointing for Democrats. Indian Americans have historically leaned towards the Democratic Party, but the new survey shows a slight shift towards Donald Trump. In the 2020 election, 68% of Indian Americans said they would vote Democrat for Joe Biden. Only 22% said they would vote for Trump. This time, the gap has reduced. About 60% say they would vote for Harris. That's a significant increase for the Republicans. And in such a close race, it could power them to the White House. Indian Americans have historically leaned towards the Democrats. Most of them still do. But of late, Donald Trump and the Republicans have made some gains. And the biggest reason for that is illegal immigration. Take the example of Fairfax County. It is home to a lot of Indian immigrants. Most of them came here legally, and they've had to wait for years for their citizenship papers to be processed. Some of them are still waiting. So they're upset. The people who came to America legally, they're upset with the Democrats for failing to control the borders. Illegal immigration was rampant for the last 3 years. Tens of thousands were crossing the border every month and getting benefits that legal migrants had to wait years for. This turned some immigrant communities against the Democrats. Some Indian Americans too. They believe that Donald Trump is the better choice when it comes to securing America's southern border, which is why thousands of Indian Americans will be voting Republican for the first time. Will this prove to be Kamala Harris's undoing? We'll find out in a few hours. But it's a completely different story on the betting market.
Elon Musk, the tech visionary who is backing Donald Trump.
In New York, the Dow Jones and Nasdaq dropped over 3%.
Joining Putin in flexing muscle is his dear friend Xi Jinping.
The U.S. law calls for a presidential poll to be held on the Tuesday.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
I like that.